Welcome back to Movie Recap. Today I'm gonna show you a 2001 American biographical sports drama film called Ali. Spoilers ahead. Sit back, relax and enjoy the video. The movie begins on February 24, 1964, where Cassius reminisces his childhood and youth memories as he trains for boxing. Then suddenly, a coach calls him to proceed with his training using a jumping rope. As Cassius repetitively jumps on the rope, he thinks of Malcolm, who's making himself an inspiration and motivator for Cassius's journey as a boxer. After a while, Cassius aggressively arrives at the conference room and mocks his challenger, Sonny, while the press takes pictures of them. After weighing Sonny's pounds, Cassius mocks him again as he goes out of the room. Afterward, Cassius entertains the interrogators and tells them he will knock out Sonny on their match. Then goes out of the room as he prepares himself for the game. Later, Cassius places himself in the arena while the referee presents him and Sonny to the audience. After that, the bell suddenly rings and begins the match. Cassius successfully stuns Sonny in round 1, winning the first round. Cassius magnificently beats up Sonny multiple times in rounds 2 and 3, whose eyes and left cheek are already bleeding. While Cassius, on the other hand, has no marks of wounds or blood on his face. Then, Cassius suddenly feels something in his eyes in the next round, giving Sonny a moment to punch him on the brakes. Unfortunately, Cassius loses it in round 5 because he can't see Sonny correctly, but he finally gets himself back in round 6. The match isn't over yet, but the commentator suddenly announces that Sonny's not coming out, making Cassius the winner and new heavyweight champion of the world. After, Cassius celebrates his championship with his family at their house. Later that night, Malcolm enters Cassius's room and invites him to go to Africa to speak at Ibadan University in Nigeria. Then later talks about his experience in Birmingham Church, where he witnesses 4 little girls who got bombed. Yet, the prohibitions of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad prevent him from speaking his thoughts and actions because Elijah is part of the civil rights struggle. Elijah is the one who begs for their place at the white man's table. And because of that, Elijah suspends Malcolm as a minister in the Nation of Islam for doing nothing. The following day, the fans mob Cassius on the street to congratulate him for winning the boxing. Then suddenly, a man asks him if he can be a champ like Joe Louis, but he answers that he's going to be a champ, but not like him, and addresses his name as Cassius X, for he doesn't want to use his name, Clay anymore. Cassius then meets Elijah Muhammad the next day. Elijah gives Cassius a gift of recognition to be known as Muhammad Ali. Later that afternoon, Cassius's grandfather madly asks about Cassius changing his family name, then answers that he is not like his father, who's drinking and praying to blonde-haired and blue-eyed Jesus. And when his father replies, his grandmother suddenly calls them for dinner. Meanwhile, Don King informs Malcolm about Elijah giving a Muslim name to Cassius, and that he will no longer go with him to Africa since Herbert Muhammad is now in charge of Cassius's training. Don also adds that Elijah extends Malcolm's suspension indefinitely. To Malcolm's dismay, he tells his wife about the sudden news. Later, Cassius arrives in Africa while sitting in a driving car, and waves at the people on the street waiting for his arrival. Afterward, he talks to his Muslim brother outside the hotel. As his Muslim brother talks about Elijah, Cassius says that he should not quarrel with Elijah Muhammad and walks out. A while later, Cassius dances with Sanji Roi while the performer sings. He then entertains her as they slow dance amid the crowd. Seconds later, Cassius takes Sanji into a room and begins coupling. As they share kisses from each other, Sanji successfully wins Cassius's heart as she says that even if she is not a Muslim, he will never be with any other but herself. The following day, Cassius tells Herbert, Howard, and Drew that he wants to marry Sanji, but they disagree. Herbert then takes out a paper on the table as Cassius signs it to make a deal. A deal where Cassius will have a kosher cook, an arrangement for their marriage at Malcolm's temple, then putting his brother on payroll, and a 50G a year just for driving and jiving. After signing, Herbert still disagrees with Cassius marrying Sanji, but Cassius tells him to fix it up, for she will be a Muslim after their wedding. Inside Cassius' unit, Sanji aggressively complains about changing her outfit as she walks out of her room. Sanji says that she's only being submissive to Cassius, but not to brother X's and Z's, who ask questions about them all the time. So, Cassius grabs her arms, and takes her back into the room. To Cassius's surprise, they both end up coupling in the bed. Afterward, Cassius drives his way out of the drive-in. At Ibadan's University, Malcolm finally gives his speech. But before he even starts, a man with a gun shoots him through his heart. People then shout, and begin panicking as they hear more gunshots inside the hall. While Cassius drives on the street, a man suddenly walks his way, so he slows down his car, and listens to him. Cassius then hears about killing Malcolm. Distress is shown on Cassius's face as he tries to absorb the sudden news like a bolt from the blue and cries. The following day, Cassius's match begins. Cassius quickly knocks his contender as people shout his name, winning his first match. Afterward, Sonjy runs towards Cassius to congratulate him, but Cassius throws offensive words at her instead of thanking her. So, Sonjy walks out. That night, Cassius asks about Sonjy's whereabouts to Herbert. So, Herbert says he has had no contact with Sonjy for 90 days. Then he orders Cassius to make a public statement of divorce at the mosque to satisfy Islamic law. Then suddenly, Floyd enters the room, and informs Cassius that his brother is taking his wife back to Chicago, crying like a widow. Yet, Cassius speaks out of care after hearing his wife's condition. Inside Cassius's room, he sees a garb of Sonjy and smells it. As the Asian cosmetology makes up Cassius's face for the interview, Cassius receives news about drafting him in the army. So, he calls Herbert to ask about it, but he suddenly stops as the staff tells him about his cue for the show interview. Cassius then speaks about it while on air, saying that using Cassius Clay's name on the news is his slave name, and that he is a free man now. He is Muhammad Ali. Cosell apologizes, and addresses Cassius as Muhammad. After the show, Cosell warns Cassius that they're coming after him because they fear black militancy in the inner cities, primarily because Cassius holds the title of a heavyweight champion of the world. Upon Cassius's arrival at the building, he lines up with the rest of the new soldiers of the U.S. Then Jerome informs Cassius that refusal to accept a lawful induction order constitutes a felony under the Universal Military Training and Service Act, punishable by 5 years imprisonment, and a $10,000 fine. Unfortunately, Cassius gets under arrest after refusing induction. After, Cassius goes to his suite with Herbert and the rest of his mates. Then he quickly calls his lawyer over the phone about his case. After the call, he defends himself after hearing Drew about what Cassius says about the US war. Cassius then says that nobody else could tell him what he will be, and he's not afraid of what he wants to be and think how he thinks. Everyone then remains silent. At the parking lot, Bob says that the US will vacate Cassius from the crown if he's convicted, and that New York may revoke his boxing license. Inside the courtroom, the judge speaks about Cassius's license to fight Terrell in Illinois, and Cassius says yes. Then the judge asks next about his preparation to apologize for his unpatriotic remarks about the war, but Cassius says no. So, the judge begins asking if he's the people's champion, and Cassius says yes, and then says that he will not apologize to him. Cassius then walks out of the courtroom as the press follows him, and asks if Cassius will dodge the draft, but Cassius answers that he will not draft dodging, burning a flag, and run to Canada. He will stay in America to fight for his rights and religious beliefs, and he will not help the US Army murder and kill other people. Later, Cassius slaps Terrell at the conference as he calls him Clay. In Cassius' next match, he aggressively punches Terrell repetitively as he keeps asking him about his name. Then Cassius hears the audience saying boo at him as he wins the match. The following day, the judge announces that the jury finds Cassius guilty of refusing induction into the United States Armed Forces. Unfortunately, the judge orders Cassius to surrender his passport as he will not benefit Cassius by fighting abroad. While Cassius is waiting for his sentence to jail, he spends his time lurking around the city, and talking with Kalila, his old schoolmate. Then, the next night, he meets up with Chauncey as he receives news about them going to be in front of the U.S. Court of Appeals next month. But then interrupts him, and talks about Jimmy Ellis, yet Chauncey speaks about his license in boxing to remind him of not getting into a fight abroad. The following month comes, Chauncey calls Cassius to head to the Supreme Court as he will petition their religious belief on a conscientious objection basis. Cassius then tells him to put it aside because he's running out of money. Later that night, Cassius watches the fight of Joe on TV with Kalila and Drew. Then suddenly, Cassius calls Cosell during his interview with Joe. Cassius keeps claiming himself as a champ and stops everybody from lying. Meanwhile, Elijah gives his speech about Ali as he suspends him from practicing Islam, and may no longer appear in the mosque to pray or have any conversation with any Muslim. On the other hand, Cassius depressively commutes on the train after hearing Drew that he sold his champion belt. Afterward, he meets up with Cosell to help his fight. Surprisingly, Cosell gives Cassius a chance to air, and speaks up about his desire to fight against Joe. The following day, Cassius gets in the car of a family photo man as he tells him that he will do a fight in Georgia, for there is no state boxing commission there. Cassius will do a prelim against Jerry Quarry, and once he hups Jerry, the family photo man will give Cassius a title shot. Luckily, the family photo man agrees, and even offers Cassius money. While Cassius is training, his bodyguard favors going to Georgia with him. Cassius agrees. Fortunately, Cassius wins against Jerry, and finally gets his promotion with the help of the family photo man. Meanwhile, Cassius receives news from Herbert backstage that Elijah lifted his suspension, and can be a Muslim again. Then, Herbert tries convincing Cassius again to be on his management, but Cassius refuses. While celebrating the win against Quarry in Khalila's house, Cosell calls Cassius, and announces his 8-0 unanimous decision on the Supreme Court. Meaning, Cassius is finally free. Finally, Cassius takes his chance to fight against Joe. And as the match begins, Joe suddenly knocks him out, and loses the first round. Yet, Cassius still fights, but he loses the game again against Joe. As Cassius's face starts bleeding, the commentator announces who wins, and unfortunately, it is Joe who wins the match. The following day, Herbert informs Cassius that he will have a rematch against Joe in about 6 months. As they talk, they watch Joe loses against George on the television. They are announcing George as the new heavyweight champion of the world. Later, Cassius discusses his fight against the new heavyweight champion, George Foreman, in Kinshasa, Zaire. As Cassius arrives at Kinshasa, people begin their chant repetitively. Confusion shows on Ali's face, so he asks the meaning of their chant. Don then says, "It's Ali, kill him." Afterward, Cassius enters the hall to tell that he's finally in Kinshasa. Then, Cassius runs on the street to jog when suddenly many kids approach and cheer his name, and run together with Cassius. As he runs, he sees the drawings on the walls about his journey in boxing. Later that night, Cassius receives news about George's incident, saying there will be a postponement until George recovers. Angelo then tells Don that if George leaves, he will not be coming back since he doesn't like the place of Kinshasa. So, Don orders Cassius to think of a way to make George stay because Don doesn't control George. So, Cassius starts a conference, and tells everyone to guard Zaire to prevent George from leaving. And at the same time, exposing Don's scheme on their match. The following day, Cassius meets Veronica Porch. Veronica compliments his speech at the conference for making sure the fight stays in Zaire. Then Cassius confirms if George's killing him is accurate, but Veronica remains silent. The awaiting match begins that night. Cassius arrives at the arena, and walks toward the boxing ring while people cheer his name. No doubt, Cassius is indeed the people's champion. Afterward, Cassius prepares himself on the boxing ring as George finally arrives and ready himself, too. While preparing, the commentator introduces Cassius and George to the audience. Afterward, the referee gives instructions, yet Cassius can't stop his mouth from mocking George. A minute later, the bell rings to begin the match. George takes his first punch against Cassius while Cassius slips to avoid getting hit. Then Cassius tries punching George, but George is tying up so that Cassius cannot throw punches in return. The first round finishes after that, but Cassius already feels his legs weaken, yet he continues fighting. As the second round begins, George sticks and moves to corner Cassius. Unfortunately, George traps Cassius, and gives him an uppercut, making Cassius lose his balance. But before he lays on the ground, Cassius quickly pulls his punches to prevent himself from knocking down. Afterward, Cassius gets back on his base as Angelo scolds him for letting George beat him. Then, the bell rings for round 3. Cassius and George meet in mid-ring, then Cassius punches first, but George swiftly counterpunch, and pushes him against the ropes. Herbert then shouts to Cassius to get off the ropes, but Cassius lays his back on the ropes as he fights George's blows against the sides of his body. As the remaining rounds continue, Cassius remains strong even though George pushes him against the ropes. Little does George knows, Cassius's tactic is to drain him. And when Cassius senses George losing his strength to punch, he finally hit George with a combination of punches to knock him down. The movie ends when Cassius, aka Muhammad Ali, winning the match against George Foreman in Kinshasa, Zaire. George falls by a combination of blows from Cassius while the people inside the arena are already screaming for Cassius's championship. Fortuitously, Cassius regains the heavyweight crown taken unjustly from him 10 years ago. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this to help the channel out. Have a nice day.